Welcome everybody to the Extra Credit Show. Happy New Year's to everybody as well. I am Anselmo Moreno.
I'm Richard David.
What's up, Rich?
Just another day, working hard, getting this credit fixed.
That's right. That's right. So we want to welcome everybody back to the Extra Credit Show. We're going to bring some really cool content today. And we're going to start off with remembering 2011. Now,
wow.
We are in 2018 now, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that don't know. And I want everybody to think back to 2011 and what relevant things happened to them or to the world in 2011. For example, 2011, if you guys can remember, that's when Osama Bin Laden was killed. So that was a big win for the U.S. Go U.S. You also remember, complete opposite of that, is when Prince William married his Princess Kate Middleton. For the Apple fans, Steve Jobs died back in 2011.
Is that when Obama released his birth certificate?
Yeah, that's when the whole birther movement was ended because Obama finally released his birth certificate in 2011. He's a real American.
It's funny because the guy who was criticizing the most back then is now president today.
Man, how does the world turn? But for those of you extra credit listeners, if you stopped paying your bills in 2011, 2018 is a big year.
Yeah, it's going to be huge.
It is your year of redemption, basically.
Oh, wow. Oh, yes, the 7-year rule.
That's right. So if somebody stopped paying their debts in 2011, the 7-year clock started, and here we are approaching 2018. And that means that all of those debts are approaching the 7-year mark at this point, or at some point this year. Obviously, it goes down to the month that the last delinquency that happened. So if you stop paying your debts in 2011, 2018 is your year.
You just hit the credit lottery.
Yeah, kind of. Well, I actually like to say that you basically are going to get out of credit jail. It's like you have the 7-year credit jail where these negative items can stay on the credit report. And after 7 years, they literally go away. Like it never happened. And a lot of people are surprised to hear about that. Like really? Like it just poof, be gone? It's like, yeah, foreclosures. Yep. Foreclosures are gone.
Yeah, a little off topic. I wonder what those would look like, credit jails. I know back in the 20s, there used to be a debtor's prison. I'm just off the topic thinking, what would credit jail look like?
I don't know. You can probably ask Bernie Madoff. I heard his jail is actually pretty spunky. I'm pretty sure he's not doing time up in San Quentin. I think he's got one of those real nice, spiffy jail joints.
Well, anyways.
But foreclosures 7 years ago. In fact, in 2011, I think we kind of hit the peak of foreclosures. And right along with foreclosures are short sales. And back in 11, I think it was kind of peaking all the short sales that were happening. So if you had a foreclosure or short sale, you stopped paying for credit cards. You maybe you had an auto loan repossession, medical bills, like anything like that. Any consumer credit type item, like I just mentioned, is subject to that 7-year rule that most people know about. And it's actually not a rule. It's a law.
It is a law.
And that's known as the Statute of Limitations for Credit Reporting. And it's a federal act, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and it governs how long negative items can remain on people's credit reports. So it's a very important thing for people to know. I know that 2011, it was kind of like we were still in a big recession.
Yes.
I think people were still financially strapped, or people may have began to feel the pinch of the financial crisis. And so a lot of people still lost things in 2011. And by things, I mean homes, cars, let go of credit cards. And so 2018 is really a big year for those folks that maybe stopped paying or were forced to default on their accounts in 2011.
Yes, it's going to be a tremendous year. As we mentioned earlier, you're going to be free from a lot of obligations on your credit report. So keep track of that. Look forward to that. And today we're going to discuss a lot of topics, more so along the lines of when does the 7 years actually end? Is there, that kind of stuff. The misconceptions such as, can the 7 years be renewed? Well, me and Anselm, we're going to talk about that today to clarify this for you.
And, because of this, I think that the 7-year statute of limitations, or the 7-year rule as it's known by people, it's probably the most misunderstood topic in all of credit.
Yes.
It's the most prominent thing that people know, but it's also the most misunderstood thing that people know. And so we want to clear that up today. In this podcast, we're going to clear that up. So we talked about the 7-year rule and that being applicable to foreclosure, short sales, mortgages, like everything related to consumer credit. But there's some very notable exceptions.
Yes,
right?
there is.
And so some of those notable exceptions are really popular things like student loans. So if you have student loans, those are not subject to the 7-year rule. Tax liens are also not subject to the 7-year rule. Bankruptcies as well are not subject to the 7-year rule. So bankruptcies actually have their own statute, right?
And depending on the state you live in, judgments as well. But that is a topic that's going to get a little trickier. But although they can only stay on your credit report for 7 years, there's a different statute of limitation on how long they can actually come after you. So it's important to know the difference on that as well.
Right. There's a lot of like credit reporting is so nuanced, and you really got to understand the context of a lot of things. But to keep it going, student loans can technically report on your credit report indefinitely.
Yes.
So there is no statute of limitations for student loans, right? Tax liens, that's a 10-year statute of limitations.
Okay.
Bankruptcies, that's also a 10-year statute of limitations.
Yep.
And so that means that the item can remain on the credit report for up to 10 years.
Yes.
Now, judgments technically are credit reported for 7 years, but like you said, it's a whole different system that governs how they're enforced.
Yes.
So credit reporting is just simply the act of someone putting a judgment on the credit report. But a whole nother subject there is the person who owns the judgment and their ability to collect it, which we know as wage garnishments and bank levies and all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Liens on property.
Liens on property. And so that a judgment in the state of California is collectible for up to 10 years. Right. So even though, and a lot of people get hung up in that period of year 7 to year 10, where it's not on the record anymore. When by record, I mean credit report. It's not on the credit report anymore, but so they can't actually see it. But then they go try to buy a property and boom, the judgment shows up because it's in that 3-year like invisibility period, I guess you can call it.
And it gets worse here in California. Unlike in most states, in California, that judgment can actually be renewed.
Yeah, multiple times, more than once,
indefinitely.
So that's a whole nother topic. So judgments are very, very bad if you haven't figured that out yet. And I think that statute of limitations is different than the credit reporting statute. And like you said, it varies from state to state.
Yes, sir.
Every state can have different statute of limitations for collectability on judgments. Some are less than 10 years, some are more than 10 years. So if you are not in California, look it up. It would be the statute of limitations on judgments. But going back to credit reporting, the 7-year statute being the most misunderstood thing, we want to expand on that a little bit more because probably I think that the root of all the misunderstandings of the 7-year rule is consumers are unable to pinpoint or figure out when that 7 years starts and when that 7 years actually ends.
And a lot of that is due to the fault of the internet. Everybody seems to want to give their opinion on when it starts or what they think they know. And it just gets so convoluted with so many different answers that people just don't know. They don't understand and they don't look up the actual facts, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to determine what the real start date is. And for those of you listening, all our viewers or all our listeners, the 7 year starts from the date of last activity, which is defined as the last time you made a payment to the creditor. So when you stop paying for this account, that's when time starts.
And that can be very confusing for people because the question then arises is, what if I made a payment to the debt collector, right? And can something like that restart that 7-year clock?
Well, it can restart a different clock, but not the 7-year clock. That time frame is set in stone. Once the original creditor gives it up, sells it, charges it off, sends it to a collection agency, the time cannot be reset for credit reporting. But it can be reset for collectability purposes, such as we were discussing judgments and whatnot.
Yeah. So for example, if you had and this is probably the most common thing, if you had a credit card in 2011 and you went through a tough time because, tough times don't discriminate, right? Sometimes it is super important Or like, for example, it is more important to keep food on the table and gas in the gas tank than to pay a credit card debt. Like we get that, we've lived that, we've helped people get through that. And so if that something like that happened to you, where you had to essentially pick between your credit cards and food on the table, the 7-year clock starts when you last made a payment, like you said, to the credit card. And then that, boom, 7 years starts. 7 years later, the account is past the statute of limitations. It gets removed from the credit report. Nothing you do or nothing that they do between then and now will restart that 7-year rule. And the big misconception is, well, what if I talk to the debt collector? Or the big one is, what if they sell it to another debt collector? I think the common preface that I hear from consumers is, oh, well, that account is super old, but it's been sold and resold and resold. And every time that it gets sold, it gets re-aged on my credit report for another 7 years. And that, I don't want to say that we've never seen it happen, because credit debt collectors, they definitely try to get away with that, but that does not make it legal, and it doesn't make it an easy challenge to win.
And that's what I tell a lot of my clients, is that, the law says one thing, but the practices are another. Collectors are going to try to get away with it from time to time. Creditors might try to do it as well. And unless you are informed and you call them out on it, you may suffer those consequences. But going back to the resetting, talking to a collector, selling it to another collection agency over and over and over, it's not going to reset the 7-year statute of limitations. It might pop up on your credit report as a new collection, because it is technically, but the 7 years is still going to be from when you stopped paying the original creditor, and there's nothing they can do about that.
What if you dispute it?
What if you dispute it?
Does that re-age to 7 years?
No.
Nothing.
Disputing is your consumer right. Listen, the credit reporting system was made to depict accurately, how lendable you are. Everything has to be accurate. Everything has to be fair. And it is your right to dispute an account. Don't ever let anyone tell you that disputing an account is not something that you don't have the right or the privilege to, because in the end, it's their burden of proof. They are the ones causing you damage by placing something derogatory on your credit report, and you have a chance to ask them to prove it. That's not going to reset the time clock. You're just exercising your rights there.
Right. And so that's the big takeaway, guys, is the 7-year statute, nothing can reset that. So don't be afraid if you want to maybe take control of your credit, take control of your situation, and you want to look into the debt. And maybe you see things on your credit report that are kind of questionable, and you're scared to just even call the debt collector because you're scared that it might re-age something or you might mess something up. Don't be scared. Nothing you do will reset that 7-year. So if you want to call a debt collector and just ask them a question like, hey, what the heck is this for? Do it. Don't be afraid that you're going to reset any statute of limitations, because you're not. The statute of limitations for the Fair Credit Reporting Act that governs how long negative items can stay on the credit report cannot be reset for any reason.
If every time you contacted a collector or creditor asking them what an account was, you reset your statute of limitations, the credit report would be almost worthless, because how would you know if the account is even a legitimate account? How would you know if this account wasn't fraud? Or are you not going to contact the creditor or collector simply because you're scared of keeping in there longer? No, that would make absolutely no sense. It is your right to question. It is your right to challenge. Do not be afraid.
Right. Especially if what's holding you back is the fear of having that account stay on there for another 7 years. Because, believe it or not, when people find out that the 7 years is maybe right around the corner, they kind of start to think like, it's 2018, right? So the big question is, should somebody pay their debts if they're going to be reaching the 7-year statute soon? So, just to paint a picture, I think it's on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
But what happens after the 7 years go by and they're still trying to collect, or can they still collect?
Yes. Just because a debt falls off your credit report doesn't mean that a collector can't call you on it. A debt is a debt is a debt, and it'll always be owed. Should you pay it? You start jumping into morality there, As a consultant, I would tell you If it's about to be 7 years and it's not a judgment, don't pay it. It's don't throw good money to bad debt, if you will. But as you just explained, it's on a case by case basis. What if the account is, just to give an example, what if the account is 6 years and 2 months old, and you want to buy this house really, really, really bad that is not going to last on the market another 10 months. You go to a mortgage lender and the mortgage lender tells you don't qualify because you have this debt that's stopping you from qualifying. Well, now it's up to you as a consumer to decide what's worth more, waiting the 10 months and saving yourself a couple grand, or buying this house now.
And that's so subjective to the situation, because obviously you have to do a cost benefit analysis on something like that.
Exactly.
For example, if you have something as big as your dream house on the line and you're talking about $1,000 in the way of an old debt, you might want to pay the $1,000 to get to the house. But if you're talking about a $50,000 debt, you might wait it out, right? So it's totally a cost benefit analysis that would be done on a situation like that.
That is correct.
But the takeaway is, the debt does not expire.
No.
They just lose their ability to credit report.
That is correct.
And with the loss of the ability to credit report, basically limits them in what they can do to kind of convince you to pay.
Well, they can't convince you to pay.
They can't, right? Well, and they can't really force you to pay either, because it's past the statute of limitations. But it doesn't mean that you don't owe the money. And a lot of people, they'll get a letter from a really old debt and they'll kind of freak out and they'll be scared that it's going to show up on their report. And most of the time the conversation goes like, well, it is an old debt. No, they can't credit report, but yes, they can still send you a letter to try to collect it, because technically at the end of the day, you still owe the money.
That is
now,
correct.
Your options are ignore it or pay it. I mean, really, or send them a cease and desist.
There you go.
Right? And the cease and desist will just stop them from sending any communications ever.
Exactly. For those of you that don't know what a cease and desist is, you have to give them a written notice explaining them just that. Don't communicate with me about this debt ever. And they can no longer call you. They can no longer send you an email. Essentially, you've tied their hands behind their back.
Yeah, and then that's going to be a fun show when we talk about the big pitfalls of the cease and desist, because it sounds amazing, but it actually has some really big pitfalls. So,
oh, yes.
But also, going back to the topic of the 7-year rule, I think that consumers, and what we find ourselves doing a lot with our clients, is when we analyze a credit report, we immediately want to inventory which accounts they have and how old they are, particularly to see when they're approaching the 7-year mark. Because if we're creating a credit repair plan and that plan is maybe a 6-month plan, we may want to avoid any accounts that hit their 7 years during the 6-month plan.
Of course, it would make no sense. Why waste time on something that is supposed to fall off?
Exactly.
Focus on the stuff that needs to be worked on immediately.
Absolutely. And so in something like that, we would definitely advise the clients like, okay, well, these accounts hit 7 years in the next month or 2 months or 3 months. It's your choice whether you want to pay them or not. But I'm telling you as an advisor that this account will be deleted from your credit report on this date of this month of this year.
It's supposed to, at least.
It's supposed to, in theory, right? And so technically, that plan is set. Now, if that person wants to particularly or possibly buy a house during that time frame, or maybe before the debt expires, then we have to talk about resolving the debt prior to hitting the 7 years. So it's all subjective, and I think that if you understand the 7 years, you're going to make the right call for your situation. Like my whole goal is, okay, a very good example is if you stop paying an account in, I don't know, December 2011,
okay,
right? So we've determined that 2018 is your year,
okay,
particularly December 2018, it hits its 7 years.
Okay.
Right. So it literally will report all the way up until the month of December most of the time. Right?
Yes.
We'll probably get it off in November, but November, December timeframe. Let's just, for clarity's sake, we'll just keep it the December date. But you absolutely have to buy a house in the summer, because you got to move. You don't want to move your kids in the middle of the school year.
Your lease is about to be up, and you don't want to sign another year lease.
Exactly. Just life situations force you to have to buy a house in the summer. So, I mean, the situation is very simple to approach. Is you either have to take care of the debt, and if like the economics make sense, if it's a $500 debt, you're probably not going to wait it out.
Nope.
Right? You'll just bite the bullet, pay the $500, knowing that it would have gone away in December anyways, but you need to buy a house in the summer and this account's in your way. Yeah, that makes sense. You're not a fool for doing it. You
No.
just made the decision of putting the house over the silly little debt.
As you stated earlier, it's you have to weigh the cost benefit analysis.
And so, on the reverse side, if it doesn't make sense because the debt is $5,000 and that you don't want to spend $5,000 and you'd rather wait till January, then you save your $5,000 and you wait till January. I mean, but that's the power that comes with understanding when the 7-year mark hits and knowing exactly how it works, so you can leverage your rights or invoke your rights and getting the accounts off when they should be, or waiting it out so you can save money when you can. So that is really, I think, the true power of understanding the 7-year statute and how it works.
That well said.
Yeah. So, but anything else? I think I'm kind of done.
Well, going to throw a wrench at you at the very end of the show. But for those of you that want to know the actualities, it's common knowledge that it's 7 years. But did you know that it's actually 7 years and 6 months? The 7 years starts from the 6 months after the action that preceded causing it going into default.
Yeah, it's a really technical.
This is for all you credit nerds out there.
Yeah, it's actually a really technical analysis of it, because like you said, the Fair Credit Reporting Act actually states, it gives a 6-month buffer from the last date of payment. So technically speaking, it can report for 7.5 years.
It doesn't always get applied, but that is the actuality of it.
I've never seen it applied.
I've seen it a few times.
I've never seen it applied. I know that we kind of discovered that extra 6 months. Like we literally read the Fair Credit Reporting Act and we discovered that, and we're like, what the heck? But then in theory, like in actual practice, because we see reports like by the hundreds. I've never seen it.
Thousands.
Yeah,
at this
by
point.
the thousands. And I've never actually seen one go the 7.5 years.
I've seen it maybe 2 or 3 times in my career.
So it's just one of those where just a weird credit fact, a really weird credit fact. But thank you for bringing that up, because if you're an expert listening to us, you just confirmed we're experts. And, for the consumers that are listening to us, hopefully that just kind of adds a layer of authenticity to us, because we do know the details and the ins and outs. And sometimes we don't like to maybe start with that because,
you don't want to confuse the consumer.
Exactly. It's just so nuanced that maybe you don't necessarily want to, bring out the big guns, if you will. We want to have a very educated public, but we also want to, and I like to explain things in a way that hopefully they can retain the information and they can process it and apply it as it applies to them. And speaking of processing info as it applies to them, are you ready for the extra credit task of the week?
Oh, yes. So the extra credit task of the week for all of you that are listening, check your credit reports for negative items.
Whether they're paid or unpaid.
Whether they're paid.
Just negative items, period.
Correct. Figure out when the 7-year time frame for them is up. Keep a record and make sure you hold the credit bureaus accountable in case they try to change the date on you. I don't know about you, but I do remember at least one time where I looked at a credit report for a consumer that was being sent in by the credit bureaus, and I saw the date, the estimated date of removal. I don't remember the specific year, but it was like May of 13. Well, next month when we did our initial disputes, we got the report back and it said expected date of removal June. And then when we did a second round, because some stuff hadn't fallen off, the expected date of removal was July of the same year. So they just kept adding a month every single time. And, it really irked me, and I nailed them on it, but it does happen. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that.
Pull a fast one on you. Yeah, I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff, and that's one of them. So if you guys want to determine and figure out exactly when the negative item should be removed, the way that you figure that out, the easiest way, and you write this down because this is a big takeaway, is you go to annualcreditreport.com and you pull each bureau, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and literally those are what we call full disclosure. So that's a full credit report. Nothing is omitted, nothing is retracted, and that credit report will very clearly tell you the expected date of removal. So you can keep a copy of the report, and it'll tell you exactly what month and what year that negative item is going to be removed. So that's the easiest way, short of you having a credit analyst look at your report and try to figure out the date of last activity and, trying to figure all that stuff out. If you just pull an annual credit report, get a full disclosure from the bureau, it will literally list on the trade line the expected date of removal very nicely and very easily for you to see. And obviously, like you said, for you to keep records of and hold these bureaus accountable in case they try to change the date on you. And sometimes it's not the bureau, sometimes it's the debt collector. So again, extra credit task of the week, check your credit reports for the negative items, figure out exactly when they're scheduled to be removed, and then hold them accountable. And if you need a cost benefit analysis as to whether you should deal with one of those old debts or not, give us a call, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you. That's actually what we do for a living besides recording these fun shows. So thank you everybody for listening to the Extra Credit Show. I am Anselmo Moreno.
I am Richard David.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. And if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Thank you, everybody. See you later.